there is no easy way out, because if the developing world, which has the majority, which was the majority already in the United Nations in the 1970s, pressed with its policies towards decisions adopted by
majority, that would likely to remain ineffective. Consensus, on the other hand, might lead to decisions which are not really decisions, which are too watered down, which are too unclear to make a difference. In that sense, this problem was identified in a different world, in a different context long ago. Now, we need decisions, as you have rightly said, Mr. Prime Minister. We should not be afraid of disagreements, and consensus should not be the supreme value. But what do we do? How do we approach this? You mentioned that it would help if the General Assembly of the United Nations could define the nature of interdependence today. Now, the fact of interdependence is very generally accepted, but it is not clear whether we have the same idea about interdependence. We are probably having very different ideas of interdependence. I do not propose to have an answer to how should that definition or how should that explanation of the nature of interdependence in our world of today look like, but I would like to invite you all to think about a particular aspect of this problem, which has to do with the interdependence of today and with the consensus making of today. We have to remain aware that nation state and sovereignty are still a basic ingredient of decision making at the national level and the international level. We in Europe are obviously very much influenced by the levels of integration achieved in our region and are very strongly in favor of integration being the future. We are in favor of a more integrated international system. But we should not overlook the other regions, especially Asia, which looks to me very Westphalian today. And we have seen repeatedly that territorial sovereignty, non-interference, and a very pragmatic view of international organizations, sometimes even a minimalistic view of international organizations, come out very clearly from that part of the world. And of course, that's very important. That's something we must not overlook. We have to understand fully, and we have to see how that element fits in the larger picture. Now, it is impossible to ignore the fact that very powerful new players in the global scene, China, India, Brazil, continue to insist that their own development is of such a high priority, and that lifting people from rural poverty is such an important aspect that it must override other considerations. Now, effective global governance requires us to be cognizant of that fact and to figure out how does one proceed with international systems of decision-making while at the same time fully respecting the legitimate development aspirations of such large nations and important players as the ones that I mentioned. That's one problem. The other problem is that beneath the current difficulties in international decision-making mechanisms, there is a much more basic economic and technological factor. Technological and social change is very much dominated by processes and technologies which governments do not control, which governments do not dominate. And therefore, they do not control the processes to a level which would allow effective international decision-making to take place. We have to be aware of that also. So, these are some of the difficulties which I think are necessary to take into account, to address in any discussion on the future decision-making. And obviously, one can be rather pessimistic in this kind of situation because these are very difficult questions and we do not see as yet how they can be best addressed.
This does not diminish the importance of specific strategies which are developed in such areas as green growth and green technology. There are many things that can be done both at the national and the international level without really addressing the bigger question of the international system of decision making. But then we have to also see at the level of global decision making the changes that are taking place and which may lead us to more optimistic conclusions. For example, the United Nations Security Council has started to consider together the issues of energy, security and climate change as a single set of questions. This obviously has not led to any specific decisions at this point, but the awareness is there, and that in itself is positive. We also have to see that sometimes international strategies and national policies can converge. Again, this does not give rise to a new and more effective global decision-making, a global system. But the convergence between the policies pursued at the international level and those pursued at the national level can be a positive factor and must be strengthened. If one takes an example, which is only one example, how did individual states react to the financial crisis? And the question is how much they invested in terms of the national stimulus packages into green growth and green technologies. Let me come back to the international Collegium, which has put the question of interdependence so strongly into the center of the international agenda. We have to talk about the nature of interdependence today. Yes, the principle is recognized, but the nature of that interdependence is not fully discussed, let alone fully understood. So that is something to be done in the future. And the only modest suggestion that I am trying to make is let us not neglect the fact of continued relevance of national sovereignty, especially in parts of the world which have seen the most dynamic growth in the recent past. And let us not overlook the opportunity for the international organizations to strengthen the convergence between national policy making and international policy making. This, Mr. Prime Minister, would be my quick and improvised response to the challenge that you put before us. There will be opportunities to discuss this further. I hope that this meeting at UNESCO will help, but there will be other meetings and many more. And of course, as this example with consensus and Mohammed Bejawi explains, some of the issues have been on the agenda for a long time and they have been changing in the process. That is our destiny. And I believe it's not a bad one. We could take the challenge at hand from the point of view that progress is possible and that little progress that can be made should be made. This is what I wanted to say this afternoon. I'm grateful for your attention, and I wish you every success in your discussions. Thank you.